if you can't be direct and honest with that person when there's something that's going wrong, like you would in a regular business relationship, then you shouldn't be in business with them.
We're in a 24/7 business. If they don't have that, you need to really weigh that in when you're going to implement a new software.
A lot of people also, when they're going to implement something, they don't have a firm plan in place of what that's going to look like.
What's going on, STR Nation? Welcome back to another episode of the Short-Term Rental Secrets Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Shogren. Here as always with my main man and brother from another mother, Mr. Emmanuel Pani. What is going on?
My brother, so good to see you. Our show today, man, we had Nate and Dan on the show.
The three main things that I took away from the conversation was, one, if you're considering getting into business with your best friend or your spouse or somebody that you're very close to, we talk about how have they made that work and why that's continued to work so well. So I thought that was super helpful if you're considering partnering with somebody that you're close with. The second was the speed to execution, like we talked about, where it was like, okay, here's our goal, here's what we want to do. And they just went. They started with 9 doors that they had partnered with each other, and I think one other person to acquire 9 properties over like a year or two. And then it was like, okay, let's go full steam. And they raised $2 million and they went out and just started going to town, then built a management company. And so in a very short period of time, their life, was insane, but in a good way. The last thing is there's many different ways to play this game with short-term rentals. The majority of people that you and I talk to, they get into it either by accident or to get out of a job, right? They're trying to replace somewhere between 8 and 20 grand a month to get out of some corporate job, and then they're good. Like that's what they want to do. The other way to play this game is what these guys are doing, is to scale it to a certain point with hyper tight systems, hyper tight contracts on the management side so that you can position yourself for an exit on the back end. And we talked about how they've been contemplating that strategy, working with consultants, understanding what cap rates and valuations you can get on the back end. So they want to get it to 500 doors, sell it to a private equity company, and then have a big exit. So there's many ways to play this game. Fascinating conversation. Let's get into it with Nate Klatt and Dan Mitchen. All right, Nate and Dan, welcome to the show, guys. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having
Good to
us.
see you having us on.
Yeah, for sure, man. I'm excited to dive in. You guys have had some crazy growth over the last year and a half. I think you said now you guys are up around 80 doors, mix of ownership, management, some funds, a whole bunch of cool stuff that I'm excited to dive into. But before we get into that, how did you guys even get into this, man? Like you went full steam, pedal to the metal in the last year and a half. How'd you get into it?
I got started in short-term rentals, and I think it was 2018. It just kind of started as a side hobby. Didn't know what I was doing. I was driving an hour and a half one way just to clean my own property. But ultimately, Nate and I were doing some single-family flips, realized it wasn't scalable. And at the time, I was also doing some Airbnbs on the side. And Nate is all about systems and processes, and he could see the vision, like, hey, we could take this down. We can really turn this into a business. And it's kind of what we did. Nate, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think to Dan's point there. So he was a realtor to start with, had the network, had the connections. We did do about 15 flips in 2021. I hated working with contractors. I have some family members that are contractors, but honestly, it just wasn't my favorite part of the business. Ultimately, we ended up doing our first Airbnb in 2021 as a group and really just leaned into it. And honestly, it was learning from podcasts like yourself on what are the system softwares to scale. That went really well. We put about 9 that we own personally, and that's kind of how we got our track record to start. And then from there, in mid 2023, we started bringing on clients with the process that we had built out. And again, from that point, from about mid 2023, we went from 9 to 10 properties to we're about 80 right now, and we have I think another 10 or 15 on our onboarding list that will be put live here later on this year. So it really just kind of felt like this industry where you have the ability to scale through software and tech, and it's just it's a fascinating time to be in the space.
So going from 9 to 80 properties in a year, that's no joke, boys. Well, that's crazy. So I would love to hear from you, what did that look like from a strategy standpoint, right? So you guys own some, then you started a fund, then you got some management. So kind of walk us through the last 12 months on how the methodology that you used to scale that quickly.
Yeah. So originally, again, we had our 9, and that was really our proof. Well, here's where we are. Here's how we operate. We have a 4.95 rating on Airbnb. We know what we're doing. From there, the goal was how do we buy more? But unfortunately, I didn't have cash sitting around. So it was like, how do we get more cash to be able to do this? So we started kind of putting our heads together. We decided to do a $2 million fund. That fund's going to buy somewhere between 23 to 25 properties in Northeast Ohio. We've currently got 17 purchased. We did raise the full $2 million. And with that, we needed a vehicle to also be able to manage the fund. So honestly, originally the property management was started just so we could manage the fund. However, Dan's network, he's got a very large network of investors in the area, and we started tapping into that. And it honestly just blew up. We had some of the best ratings, if not the best ratings in Ohio. And we were able to start to generate these clients. And that really allowed us to then scale the business. So now all of a sudden, kind of to the point of what does the team look like? Um, we have a general manager, we have an ad cleaner, we have a full-time interior designer, we have 2 maintenance individuals, we have Dan and myself, we have 5 virtual assistants, and we really said, let's scale this so that we can make this larger. Let's not scale it to be a 60 to 70 unit thing, but how do we really make this to be ultimately the goal of 500 plus units that are managed and owned? Um, we'd love to just stick on the properties that we personally own through the fund, but inevitably, in order to really get that cash flow, to really be able to put the proper system, software, people in place, the property management allowed to really be fuel for the fire.
So what's the breakdown now? So you guys had the 9 that you owned as like a partnership, and you bought 17 in the fund so far with a plan to buy 25.
Yep.
And then how'd you scale the management so quick?
Yeah, I think the big thing for us was honestly came down to providing good results for our clients. We've had quite a few referrals. We've yet to have a client leave us, and then we've had quite a few um, clients that have added properties. And I think the one thing that's interesting for us is we have roughly 15 clients that make up the 60 listings that we manage. And of those 15 clients, 10 of them are investors that also do flips. So they were buying homes, they were selling them, they're paying all these capital gains taxes. And I'm a CPA like yourself. So it's like, hey, like, let's show you how we can do this better. We're going to generate consistent income for you. You're going to have these accelerated appreciation, not be paying these taxes. Let's bring on more properties with us. You're seeing these results and really trying to lean into them of like, this is a better way to do it for you. You get to hold that asset and it's passive for you. Our goal is how we can be as passive as possible for our clients. And that's really what we're striving to do. And that's really allowed us to accelerate. And then Dan does a fantastic job with just his social media presence as well.
I love that because there's a couple different approaches that you can go, and I always talk about there's really like at a high level 2 different types of investors that own these properties. You have the investors like you guys are working with, and then you have the folks that are buying vacation homes that they like to use a few times a year and then have somebody else rent it out. I was always super introverted, as a CPA getting into this. I didn't know how to sell. I didn't know how to do anything. So in my mind, I'm really good with numbers. I can communicate numbers and returns and things like that well to investors. And the beauty is when you work with investors, they're always buying more deals. So you build a few key relationships like you guys, you got 15 great investors. Say they each average 4 deals, boom. You don't have 15 properties, now you got 60, right? Because you've got a few key relationships with the investors. Um,
From there, it can spread like wildfire too. Like just word of mouth, and especially in a small market like Cleveland, like we do a good job with one investor, and he tells his friends. And next thing you know, we're sponsoring events, and it can really snowball.
And I do think as well, kind of on that point, in today's market, people want to understand numbers, and there's always a little bit of like, how aggressive do you want to underwrite? So you never want to, promise the moon. But at the same time, if you can put together professional underwriting, and again, we'll use a combination of actual homes that we own or manage as well as price labs to really put together thorough projections that we feel very comfortable with. There's a sense of assurance from investors, especially when you can hit those numbers and you can say, hey, here's the numbers we projected. We sit down annually with the clients. We talk about what we hit. They see those results. And sometimes they don't even realize that we're well over projections. And they're like, oh, okay, like maybe I should be leaning into this more. Maybe I should be doing more of these. And then that starts to really again kind of get that snowball effect.
have you had to, and E, I'll shut up here because I know you want to jump in, but just out of curiosity, have you had to, you're working with a lot of folks that are flipping houses, and not saying that this is how all flippers work, but a lot of them, they'll do these spec flips, try and keep their costs as low as possible. And they're just not, it's two different worlds. In my opinion, the game with short-term rentals is to be able to spend as much as you possibly can to make it as nice as possible, because that's where you're really going to generate the spread on your return. Or on the flipping side, it's the opposite, where you're really trying to squeeze out as much as you can from the least amount as possible. If you take that same approach to the STRs, you're going to have a mediocre product at best that's not going to generate those high returns. So if you had to have some of those conversations with the flippers.
We've been fortunate in the fact that, one, especially as we continue to grow, in the beginning, you take what you can get, right? You don't have a track record. You just kind of try to take on clients. As you grow, you can be a little more selective. And the piece that we really like about those investors is, one, they are putting out a good product, which we're very fortunate for. But in addition to kind of having that in-house interior designer, we have about 6 consultants that we use as well. So they're putting money into the home, but they're also, we make it very clear, like, this has to be professionally designed. It has to be designed well, or else you might as well not even do it. If you don't have a well-designed home, you just can't succeed. And they trust us. So they don't touch the design process. We handle that from A to Z. Again, we have an in-house interior designer that manages it. So again, how do I scale? I like to think I know what I do when it talks to taste, but like, my wife would think otherwise. So it's really, how do you put the right people in place to make sure that you have the right looking property?
So our wife is 10 years better.
Sorry, I think it's also just setting expectations, like with my network. Like, people know now, like, we won't take on, call it a rental grade flip. Like, we want properties that have the quartz countertops, the nice backsplashes, the nice bathrooms, the whole 9 yards. Because honestly, like, if we were still to just take on every single listing, it's going to reflect in the reviews. We're going to get bumped lower on the OTA algorithm, and overall, just not as a great of a brand, if that makes sense. So I think it's also just a big part of just setting expectations with your network.
Yeah. And I also think, in my personal experience at least, having this conversation with an investor when you can just put it black and white and understanding, like, hey, look, this much investment equals this much return, a little bit more investment equals a little bit more return. They usually tend to be not as emotionally involved in it. And the fact that you are designing it and they're hands off in a way is great for you guys, because they're not there telling you, like, but my wife really likes a blue wall instead of a pink wall. And you're like, it doesn't matter, right? Where I would love to take us next, we hear a lot about, like, people doing funds. So walk us through kind of like what the structure of the fund was, what the conversation was, and, like, if you can, just high level, what are investors getting, and how come you're able to raise but not explain to people, right? Because people maybe don't understand that, like, you can raise the money, but you haven't bought all the properties yet, right? So explain kind of like how that works.
Yeah. So, originally, for even the 9 homes that we owned, we actually did it through notes payable. We took notes payable out from friends and family. In the beginning, it was actually a 13% interest. Now everyone's at an 8% interest rate. So we were able to kind of lower that with the track record. But ultimately, people wanted to have equity in the fund. Or equity in the properties. They wanted to feel like they were part of it. So that's, again, where, like, the fund came into play. And the way that really looks is, so we did create a 506B using a PPM, so private placement memorandum. So again, it is an SEC security. And then the way we structured it is, we ultimately own about 45% of the fund as general partners. The limited partners then own about 55%. And the beautiful thing for that is, these investors, they're going to get cash returns. They're getting an 8% preferred return. They're going to get their annual basically dividends. And because we are going to do some of the different tax things, so tax segregation, bonus depreciation, they're going to be able to get about 5 to 6 years of tax-free cash flow as well. And when we were looking at it, it's like, what is the right amount of returns for investors versus the right amount of equity for us? And most investment vehicles, when you look at it, they're usually in that 8 to 12% cash on cash. They're usually in that 20% annualized returns. And that's really what we shot for. And that's what we projected out. So when we were thinking about how much is the right amount to give up, that's how we looked at it. Again, we did it with a slight conservative underwriting. And I would say this is very important for anyone that's newer. The last thing you want to do if your goal is to grow is to overshoot your projections, miss your first one, your second one. It's so important that you do it well and you hit your returns. If you don't, people aren't going to trust you. They're not going to reinvest with you. They're not going to spread that word of mouth. So we were very intentional to also be a little conservative. And so far, we're pretty proud. I think right now we're 11% over revenue projections through the first year with the properties that are live. And again, that was very intentional. Like, how do we make sure that we hit our returns?
So did you have to purchase, do you have an amount of time by which you have to spend the 2 million? What happens if you're not able to spend all the 2 million? What does that look like?
Yeah. So one thing to think about too, again, if someone's looking to do this, is what we did was we required 10% down. And then from there you do cash calls. So because every time someone gives us money, we're accruing that 8% preferred return, and we don't get paid until we get above that preferred return. Rather than taking 100% up front, we did it over 3 different cash calls. So I think right now we've taken about 1.5 million of the 2 million. We'll then use that last $500,000 over the next 2-3 months to kind of finalize out the fund. But the whole goal was, hey, let's take it as we need it versus sitting on 2 million. You're basically paying 8% interest in a way. So let's take it as we need it as we close on homes and then as we're furnishing it. Because the two big costs are ultimately the down payment. We still are doing leverage. We're still looking at 80% leverage. And then you're looking at roughly 20 to 25,000 to furnish it. We personally lean into hot tubs. So it usually ends up being closer to 25 to 30 because every single property that makes sense, we're adding a hot tub as one of those unique amenities that really stand out on Airbnb and the Cleveland market.
Got it.
What's the typical, I'm just curious, what's the typical like size and cost of the deals that you guys are doing? Because it's so market dependent, right? Somebody in California or in Boston near me, they're like, $2 million isn't going to go very far, right? Everything is market dependent.
Yep.
We kind of lucked out being in Cleveland, to be honest. Like, it's just here in my backyard. But I would say our average purchase price is, Nate, you can confirm, but probably around like 250 grand. So at 250 grands, that'll get us sometimes a 3-bedroom, sometimes a 4-bedroom. Obviously, we shoot for the 4, and then around like mid 50s in gross revenue per year.
That's been solid. That's pretty
And
solid.
the thing that's really cool about the fund aspect is we are then the property managers as well. So we find homes that we really like. Again, we want to make sure that we succeed. And then we are the property manager. So it's the best client you could possibly have. You make sure that, hey, like it's a home you'd want to do as a property manager. And then one other kind of call out there is, like, because of the team in place and because we have that background in flipping, we don't do flips by any means, but there are a few properties where it's like, hey, there's a few minor cosmetic changes that we could do. So maybe we put 5 or 10 grand of rehab in, like, cosmetically. And we're also getting some of that built in, like forced appreciation. And then the last call, and Dan is right. Again, we're in that 250 range. We're in that mid 50s to low 60s kind of on a revenue standpoint. And these are primarily, like, again, quartz countertops, new LVP flooring. They fit like what we're looking for. You can find a property with a pool in our market, like in the Midwest, it's very rare. So even some of the properties that we'll buy, we have one that we bought for 185. We put about 15,000 into it. So we're all in for around 200, and it's going to hit in the low 70s this year. And it's a pool property. So during the summer, we were pushing 12, 13 grand a month in revenue. So you can kind of find some of these like very unique properties. Now, again, it would take forever to do only pool properties, but you can find some of these as you go that really help to juice the returns as well.
Mm. Do you have are you managing any properties outside of the fund? You are, correct? So are there different management fees for the fund clients versus outside clients, or is it just uniform across the board regardless?
No, we did give a discount to the fund. And again, that was intentional to say, like, how do we make sure the returns stack up to what we want? And the one kind of conservative in nature thing that I did like about this fund is, for any reason, if we didn't hit our returns, just personally, like, I was having a conversation with someone, like, a lot of the investors are friends, family. They're like the ones where you're going to go to Thanksgiving dinner with, and you don't want to look at them in the eye and say you lost their money. So, one of the things that even in my back of my head is, like, for any reason we didn't hit those numbers, like, we could always lower our property management fee, which we already gave a discount, but we could always lower that to then make sure, again, that investors got their money back. Cause that's the number one thing, is like, how do investors get their returns? Like, if you're going to take on people's money, you have to be confident in what you're doing, and you have to have that level of fiduciary duty to say, I'm going to make sure hell or high water that the investors get their money.
What's the run rate on the strategy? Like, is it to sell these? Is it to refi them? Like, how are you getting the cash out on the back end of it for the investors?
So we probably will do a refinance. Our interest rates when we started for the fund were pushing high 8s. Now we're in like the high 6s to low 7s. When we originally did the underwriting, we thought we were being conservative. We put it at 8% because rates at that time were in the mid to high 6s when we started. So we'll refinance some of the ones. The thing that's interesting right now, and actually I've been having conversations with C2G advisors and Jacoby, who's pretty well known in the industry, is what does the market look like when it comes to cap rates for short-term rentals? And I think right now it's still it's a new enough industry that it's still kind of being decided. When we did our projections, we just assumed, hey, we're going to get 3% appreciation a year, nothing overly aggressive, and that's kind of how we projected it. But there's definitely a world that I didn't do in underwriting where we go and we sell. We have this fund, we have our 9 properties, we do a second fund, we go and sell 100 homes to a private equity group, and they pay us some kind of multiple because you have these cash flowing assets. They're done for you. We then stick on as the property managers, and now all of a sudden you really can get a kind of a boost in returns from that standpoint. We didn't underwrite it. I don't know what that will look like, but it is kind of one of those alternative, end states that's possible.
I like that as the cherry on top, right?
Yep.
Like that's the home run play, but you're not banking on that. Because I agree, if you have enough scale, and the other thing I was going to ask is your hub was in Cleveland, and we were talking offline about you might be spreading into a couple other markets that are fairly close. I would bet, but I'd be curious to see if you guys have talked to the consultants about this. If the goal would be to sell it to like a PE firm someday, it would likely be more attractive if they were centralized in, say, 3 markets versus spread across the entire country just for economies of scale and efficiency. But I don't know. But in my mind, it might be more attractive that way.
That was kind of the feedback I got was you don't want to be in one market because there's a concentration risk, but you don't want to be scaled everywhere. So it's like for us right now, knowing most of the Midwest has got similar-ish returns, the Midwest will be the focus. We're close enough to the process that we're able to really control it. You see some of these property management companies that get too large, they try to scale too fast. They're in too many different markets, and their quality just goes south. So it's like, how do you find the right balance of scale to quality?
I'll shut up now, E.
No, it's funny. A lot of the questions, as always, like are questions that I'm thinking, phrase a little bit different. But the thing that we always find very interesting when we have guests like you guys, it's one, what the big term vision is, which I think we kind of got some idea of. But I'm always curious of like, what does the day to day look like now? So you guys are like a 2-3 years in. I understand then is like the maybe front side investor-ish property wise. What does Nate do? And then where are you guys scaling? Like who's your next big hire as you guys are growing this company?
So yeah, I'm more so our boots on the ground. And I say boots on the ground, but I rarely go to the properties until they're purchased and set up and ready to go. It's more so setting up the systems and processes on the back end. I was doing our revenue management, although we're getting to the point now where 80 properties, it's taking quite a bit more time to do that. But that's kind of what I do, meet with the team, making sure everything flows the way it needs to flow, implementing new software and just redefining our processes. And then Nate, I'll let you speak to what you do. I'm not really sure.
I pretty much sit on my hands and I do nothing. I let Dan run everything.
It's funny. So Nate and I we grew up together. So high school best friends. He was my best man. I was his best man. And I will say it's really cool, like seeing the team give him all sorts of crap all the time too. Like just bragging on him. I love it.
And I think the key really and I kind of, I'll kind of touch this at the end too, but like the key is really, you mentioned kind of like what is the vision? I think everyone really needs to reassess that every 6 months to a year. Like what do you want? Dan and I were chatting about this just 6 months ago, and it's like, Dan, we could have a very comfortable lifestyle with just keeping the 60, 80 properties and be very content. And it's like, is that what we want? I don't know. Do we want to grow bigger? Do you have goals to go bigger? Is that what you want? I don't know. But like, have that conversation and really ask yourself, like, what do you want? And that's going to determine kind of how you set things up. So our goal ultimately was like, you know what, I was a former football player at Michigan State. I had that competitive like nature in me of like wanting to like grow and scale this. And like, there's, you know, a little bit of that's probably ego, but like, I want to be able to say I built something larger than myself. I built something that can grow. So for us, ultimately, it was like, we need to put the right people in place, the right software. Like we need to basically have the right people in place one inflection point before you necessarily need them. Like I know we want to get there. So like, how do we get the right people in place? So it's really thinking about that of like, what is that end goal in mind? So, you know, with that, I think right now we're using 30 different softwares. And again, there's a combination. Some of them are a little lower. Some of them are more like, you know, required. You know, we built out a team now that has about 14 people, and it's really making sure that those guys feel like they're supported. So it's meeting with certain members once a week, certain members twice a week, making sure everyone feels supported. Where are the friction points? Where are the bottlenecks? How can we help solve that? And then honestly, getting to chat with guys like you where, hey, like you guys have been there, you guys have done these things. Like, let me pick your brain. Let me understand what you were thinking. Like, let me understand how you guys got to where you got, and then really try to implement those into the process. So every day is different, but it really is kind of thinking with the end in mind.
I love that. And to kind of circle back on the second part of his question, we were talking offline about, I believe you guys were talking about bringing on a partner as a business developer, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think that's where we were going with that conversation. Is that still the play, or what are you guys thinking as far as your next key hire, you think?
Yeah. So we, you know, right now the goal has been like, how do you get the right people in place? So we brought in again the general manager most recently. Interior designer was, well, actually originally she was kind of like a little bit of everything because she was early on. And then yeah, our next goal is probably to bring in someone that's going to be more focused on growth. So how do we focus now on acquisitions? A big thing for us right now is we just launched a direct booking website about 2 months ago. How do we start getting more direct bookings? You know, we have stay files on all the properties. We started to kind of get all the email lists, but we're not leveraging it the way we should because it wasn't a focus. It's always kind of like pick your top three things. You can't do everything. You can't boil the ocean, but pick the top three things that are required at that moment for you. Kind of have the other ones, you know, in the peripherals, but like focus on those three and then know that, hey, this next inflection point, now we'll focus on the next thing. So our next focus is direct bookings and client acquisitions, and how do we really scale that? And then make sure the onboarding is as smooth as possible. I worked for a Y Combinator up in the Bay up until earlier this year. And that's always the most challenging in any, like, again, I like to really look at it as like a tech company. That's always the most challenging aspect is like, how do you onboard a property in a good fashion? Once they're on board, it's relatively smooth, but it's like, how do you create that best funnel all the way through onboarding?
I agree. And I know I did some digging and I saw you guys do a pretty regular post on LinkedIn about some of the tech that you've implemented and how you're constantly testing stuff. And I'm very curious, what's your process for, I guess, like beta testing it before you go all in? Because as you guys now know at scale, changing certain softwares is not a, a quick thing for a lot of things, you know, especially if it's a PMS or a big piece like that. So what does that look like for you? And how do you assess where or when should you change or add different software?
I think the biggest thing is Dan's been taking the lead on Breezeway. For instance, we implemented Breezeway recently, and it was a situation where we had a process built out. The cleaner would take videos, they'd put it into Slack, they'd note any kind of, like, we had a cleaner communication channel for issues, and then we had an individual channel, but like you could just tell the process was going to break. So it was, okay, we need to put a process in here. And especially with where we're at now, let's hire whatever the best in class software is, honestly. And again, Breezeway is kind of a known name. It's the known standard in the industry. So let's lean into the best in class. And then the one benefit again about being a little larger is, and you should do this regardless of, like, negotiate every single contract you get as well. So you can try to keep your costs down by negotiating with vendors. There's enough competition in this industry that you really have that ability to say, I'm not going to take the sticker price. Like, I am going to negotiate whatever that contract looks like. Um, but it's really just identifying where do you think bottlenecks and processes are going to break and trying to get ahead of those 3 to 6 months beforehand. We actually started with a different PMS before we went with HostAway. And this is when we had 9 properties and it sucked moving from a different PMS to HostAway. So that kind of scarred us of like, hey, let's just pick the best in class and make sure that we get, what we feel is good. The last call I'll have, and I defer to Dan here, is personally, I like to focus on some softwares too that are easy to put in and to rip out. So if I have a software that's low hanging fruit, it's going to take me an hour or two to put in because it's relatively easy, and it's going to take me an hour or two to pull out. Like, I'm much more willing to test those out. If it's a process like Breezeway, we interviewed a few different clients, like whatever we put in now, we're not going to want to switch this. So we need to be very thorough. I think we took a month to make our final decision on Breezeway because we just knew the onboarding was going to be rough inevitably, and ripping it out would be even 10 times worse. So it's like, make sure you make the right decision on those kind of softwares.
Yeah, I think Nate hit the nail on the head there. We also in the past we use Zapier. So Zapier helps us out quite a bit with some automation where I would set up Zaps or bots to analyze a Slack channel, and then that's how we knew if pets were staying, if properties were clean. It would then automatically create a bill in QuickBooks, which worked for like I would say 40-ish properties, and now it's just to the point where again it's not sustainable. We can't scale that way, and that's where something like Breezeway comes in. So I think we've always known like we can see things break before they actually break, and just acting fast and getting a head start on it.
Yeah. The reason I bring that up too is just there's so many new softwares, and a lot of them have a lot of potential, but a lot of them aren't exactly stress tested to the max yet because they're so new. One of our boardroom members was telling me about a new PMS, and I'm not going to name him, but he's like, man, this is amazing. Like I'm cutting my costs. I'm leaving OwnerRes and I'm doing this thing and this thing. And like 30 days later, he's like, yeah, this was buggy and this thing was buggy, and now they're back on OwnerRes. I'm like, yeah, exactly. Like if you're small and nimble, say you've got 1 to 10 or maybe 15 properties, yeah, it's a pain in the butt, but it's easier to switch back and forth. But when you have 80 doors, it's a pain in the butt. And what I'll say with PMSs is, yeah, they're not, the ones that are meant for big scale, like a HostAway or a Guesty Pro or an Owner or whatever, they might not always be the cheapest, but most of them have been around a while. They've gotten the majority of the bugs fixed. None of them are perfect. So it's like, you just got to pick which devil and just deal with the quirks and just stick with it. Because there's always going to be some shiny new object. Grass is always greener over here, but they all have their issues. So if it's not broke, don't try and fix it, right? That's why I was kind of asking, like, how do you know when you should add something? Because otherwise, you just end up testing a million different things and you're getting shiny object syndrome, and your business isn't growing or, increasing profitability.
It's funny you bring that up too. I think it was last year we started experimenting with an AI guest messaging service, and I won't name them, but like we were really excited about it, and it was not a good fit. It caused more issues than it did good, and I never wanted to look at an AI guest messaging tool again. And then recently, we partnered with a company that does the same thing a couple months ago, and it's a game changer. Just seeing like their platform, our VAs being able to mark conversations done, the suggestive replies are on point, and it makes our life 100 times easier. So, I don't know. You mentioned that, and that's the first thing I thought of, is especially like AI software.
Yeah. I think that the other thing, especially with AI, is really understanding how early it is, and also understanding how much it's like a team member. So the input is just as important for the output. And people just assume it's like, oh, it's AI, it's a thing, but it's just like, it needs to be fed information. So unless you do proper job onboarding the system and putting the right stuff in, the machine is going to be limited to what it can do. And it's always your fault, really. Like, to me, I'm always like, I'm not great with systems. Up until now, I haven't been great with systems. And like one of the big things for me is always like, okay, like this sounds good. One, if you're somebody that gets excited like me, is bringing on a team member that is going to be one, the one to like actually implement it. And two, there's a little bit more kind of like shy when it comes to like kind of pulling the trigger to ask all the questions. Because I get juiced up. I'm like, let's do it. And then they're like, this is terrible. We don't need half of these things. Costs a bunch of money and it's a nightmare. Right. And so in really like growing that and always going back to me. So it's going back, is this software, is this piece of tech going to help us achieve our goals? Yes or no? And never add stuff in just because it's cool, just because it's the latest. It's like, what is the problem we're trying to fix? And are we going to reach our goal faster, better, cheaper? Yes or no? Sorry, Nate.
I think a lot of people also, when they're going to implement something, they don't have a firm plan in place of what that's going to look like. I'll give an example. We're implementing Notion right now. So Notion, you could put all your policies, you can put all your property descriptions, you can do Notion AI, and you can ask questions. And we were going to set it up, and we started doing it. It's like, again, a bandwidth issue. It's like, do we have the bandwidth to set this up properly? We ended up hiring a consultant through a network. We're paying him a couple $1,000s to set it up right. And for us, it's like, I'd rather spend the money, get it done right, and then it'd be a usable product than to grab something because you got shiny object syndrome. You grab it, you don't put it in right, you don't implement it right, and then it never really works. And then you just have to tear it back out. So it's like, really make sure you're setting up right. And then whether that is, again, we hired a consultant in this place, or in the case of Breezely, I think we're messaging them daily with like, we need help on this, we need help on this, we need help on this. Dan mentioned the AI. We're actually using Host AI as the AI messenger. We're in a Slack channel with them, and they're messaging us on Sundays. And it's like, we're slacking them every day of like, here's any issues we have, like, get this fixed. And we're very like, or the client, get it fixed. And you have that communication, but you need to set those expectations up front. It's like, we are going to be a little needy because we want it done right, and help us get there.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point that I just want to highlight for the listeners. If you're going to implement a new software, one of the questions to ask is, what does your support and ticketing system look like, and what are their hours, and where are they based? Because there's a lot of amazing software out there, or different providers out there. And anytime somebody is complaining to me about the software, it's typically not directly the software, it's the support on the back end of the software of like, oh, well, they're working with folks in the Philippines or overseas, and I have to message them at night, and then I have to wait 24 hours to get a response, and I've lost a day and a half, right? So to your point of having either a number to call that's 24/7, or a messaging service that you can message somebody that's 24/7, we're in a 24/7 business. So if they don't have that, you need to really weigh that in when you're going to implement a new software.
100%.
I know we're getting tight on time here. So I want to make sure, before we get into the last questions here, where can the folks learn more about you guys and everything that you have going on, and check out your properties, man?
So myself, you can find me. I kind of despise social media, but I'm trying to get into it just because I know that's part of the industry. So you can find me on LinkedIn at Nate Klatt, and then we have Home Hop Property Management is going to be our name, and you can really find us on Instagram, Facebook, kind of all the above. And then our direct booking website is homehop.pm, as in propertymanagement.com. We had an individual that bought HomeHop, the URL, and wants $20,000 for it, and we refused. So we're homehop.pm.com. It's the short little backstory there.
And I believe that's our Instagram tag as well, as Home Hot PM. And then I'm on everything, but I'm most active on Facebook. There are two Dan Mitchens, but I'm the one with no hair. And that's where you can find me. A lot of our updates.
You guys just level each other out. Okay? Face the wrong hawk, and Dan keeps it nice and bicked. So
They're the perfect partnership.
love it. Love it. And actually, that before I get into the very last question, I would love to ask you guys, because people message us all the time about, I really want to get a business partner, or should I get a business partner? My best friend and I want to go in on this. And I always have very direct conversations with people about like, what are the questions that you should be asking before you just jump into a business with a buddy? But is there anything or any advice that you could give the listeners if they're considering getting into a partnership, especially if it's with a friend or a spouse or whatever? What advice would you give to them?
I've been in some partnerships in the past, and I will say it's completely different working with Nate. And I have had people where they told me don't mix friends and business. I don't know if I'm lagging out here. Sorry, I think I was lagging out. Did you guys hear everything or part of that cut out? I was always told to not mix friends and business, but I will say Nate has been great to work with so far. We're both very level headed, where even sometimes like emotions might get high on my side or his side, but we know how the other person is, and we know when to kind of keep those emotions in check.
I think the big thing when you're thinking about it is one, you need to have a level of transparency. You need to kind of know upfront, again, before like, the end of mind, like what is your long-term goal? I wanted to grow a big business. Had Dan said, no, I want to keep it at 50, there would have been some friction. So like you need to have those like conversations of like, what do you see this being ultimately? And then I think the other piece is like, there is a little bit of just emotional intelligence that comes with it of, I know this person. Do they get frustrated and upset frequently? Do they have, sounds kind of bad, but do they have outbursts? Like, make sure you're working with someone where I think Dan and I have known each other for 20 years. We've never been in a fight. So make sure you're getting someone that has that personality with you, and then never be afraid to question somebody. Like, you have to be able to, in a thing where if I don't like what Dan's doing, I tell him that. I'm very direct, and he knows that about me, and vice versa. So like, if you can't be direct and honest with that person when there's something that's going wrong, like you would in a regular business relationship, then you shouldn't be in business with them. Now, if you can have that true honesty, that true transparency, and say when you think they're doing something wrong, and be, them being willing to take feedback, then I think you can absolutely make it work.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, the last question that we ask all of our guests is, what is your number one secret to success with short-term rentals?
It's always scale with the end in mind. So whatever your goal is, know what that goal is from a scale standpoint. And again, if your goal is to grow larger, scale one step too quick. Hire one too fast. You don't want to be that host that I can't go on vacation. I can't put my phone down at night because I need to be on my phone 24/7. Like, it's not going to be sustainable, and you're going to burn out and you're going to crash. So make sure you really are thinking about, how do I scale to whatever level that is? And it's going to allow you to get there.
And I would say is just connecting with people, especially your network, and being consistent with it. So it doesn't even have to be all business, but just show people that you're a real human being, celebrate their wins on social media, go to their events, support them, and in return, you're going to get that back.
Love it. Love it. Well, Nate and Dan, thank you guys so much for being here. Appreciate it. For listeners out there, hope you guys have an amazing week, and we will talk to you soon.
Ciao, guys.
Hey, STR Nation, if you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave us a review. And in the comments, let us know what topics you want us to cover on upcoming episodes, and we'll make sure to get that in the books for you. And if you really want to learn how to launch, automate, and scale your short-term rental business, if you want to go deeper, then check out our free masterclass at strsecrets.com.